2022 meeting of the Citizen Review Board is now called to order. If you will, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, we'll continue with the roll call.
Banks.
Present.
Collins. Tamayo.
Present.
Reyes.
Present.
Guy. Akil.
Present.
Ingandela.
Present.
Valdez.
Present.
Irvin.
Present.
Let the record show that all members of the Citizen Review Board are present with the exception of Dr. Collins. At this time, we'll ask our Vice Chair, Corporate Reyes, to read the meeting guideline.
Good evening. Please silence all electronic devices. The duties and responsibilities of the Citizens Review Board are to review completed department investigations involving use of force and cases of importance and interest to the community or the city. Determine whether the disposition of reviewed cases was consistent with department policies and procedures. Review matters of importance or interest and make recommendations regarding the handling of these matters. Determine whether any revisions or additions to department policy and procedures are appropriate in reviewing matters of or importance or interest, and report findings and recommendations to the mayor and chief of police. Cases that are brought before the Citizens Review Board are closed internal affairs cases that have been investigated and brought to the police chief for disposition. It is the Citizens Review Board's job to review the cases and render an opinion as to whether the investigation was done according to department policies and procedures. The Citizens Review Board members are provided the investigative files in advance of the meeting. The Citizens Review Board will hear from the department whenever matters of interest or importance are requested for review by the board or the department. The coordinator for the board is Captain Patrick Mesmer. Any person who wishes to make a complaint concerning a matter which may be considered by the Professional Standards Bureau should see Captain Mesmer for information on how to file a complaint. The board should not discuss matters where the city or the department may likely be a party in litigation.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We'll now move with the approval of the minutes from July 26, 2022.
Move to approve.
Board member Ms. Irene Guy has made a motion to approve the minutes of Tuesday, July 26, 2022. Mr. Tamayo has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we will continue with the vote. All those in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed, please show by raise of hand. The motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the public comment portion of our meeting. I do have a list, sign-in list here of a few patrons that would like to participate in the public comment portion. As I call your name, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record. First on the list is Will Amon.
I'd like to pass a comment.
Joe Nahana.
Hello, my name is Joseph Nohava. I'm from the North Tampa area. I guess my question would be if there's been any reports on or word from or word about the noise ordinance that was recently passed, and if anybody has been cited or pulled over as a result of that. I mean, I think just in general, you know, ordinances like that have a lot of potential to be misused and to target, you know, African American or Latino communities, populations. So I was just wondering if there's been any kind of issue with that so far. I definitely think, you know, it has a lot of potential for abuse, and that's, you know, kind of concerning considering the city's, you know, history with things like biking while black and renting while black. You know, I definitely would not want a repeat of that sort of policy that has led to, you know, federal investigation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Noah Myers, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record. Please allow your comments to 3 minutes.
Hello, Noah Myers. I'm from the Temple Terrace area. I just want to say that I was at the meeting last month, and quite frankly, I want to say that I was a little bit appalled. There were a few members here who were showing active disdain toward their duty. I didn't like that quite one bit, because when you guys act that way, the anxiety that occurs in the community is translated back into the black and brown communities that we're supposed to be protecting, that are supposed to be safe and not, you know, it should raise alarm bells to every single one of the members here that the police were able to set up a program that efficiently targeted black people at 95% rate, the crime-free housing program. That should raise the biggest alarm bell possible. I mean, quite frankly, I think this board needs to have an antagonistic relationship with the police. What they are up to, what they are doing, what they want to do, and we should be clear-headed about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let the record show that Dr. Collins is present. Are there any other participants in reference to public comment? Typically, I would request that if there were voicemail set up for public comment as well. If you will, Ms. Kamaria Pettis-Mackle, if you can share with us in reference to the voicemail number and the complaints, in reference to the difference between public comment portion and the complaint line. Or Mike Schmidt.
Yeah, no, I'll address that because I was here when all that got set up. Mike Schmidt with the City Attorney's Office. The voicemail got set up during COVID, and so there was no voicemail option prior to COVID, but voicemail became an option once COVID hit, and we wanted to give people the opportunity to provide public comments by voicemail. So we set up a voicemail option, and that went out on the notice of the hearings. I would say over the couple of years that we've had it, there have been maybe 1 or 2 comments. Every month we check it. I have somebody at my office check the voicemail line, and then I report back every month about whether or not there's been any comments. For example, I had my assistant check it today. There were no comments. So I normally come back and report to you whether or not there were any comments left on the voicemail. Since we are back in person, since we are meeting here, I'm not sure if this board wishes to continue to maintain that phone number. Again, there's only been a couple of comments ever posted on it. And I obviously think it's for the board's consideration whether or not it wishes to maintain that phone number or to, obviously we're going to continue to always have public comments here in person now. So it's, I guess, up to the chair and the board whether or not y'all wish to maintain that phone line for public comments.
I have a question. Is that the same with the written comments that we may not receive?
So, Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. So, if it's the pleasure of the board to allow members of the public to email public comment, we could have an email be sent to the clerk, and I could work with the clerk regarding sending public comment to the clerk. But that's what is now determined for the board to decide how you want to move forward. Do you want public comment for those individuals who can't attend in person to provide public comment through email to the clerk? Or would you like to still, that's the purpose of sending your public comment in advance. The phone number poses the problem with leaving a message, transcribing the message, whether or not you transcribe the message correctly. So it's just the pleasure of the board how you would like to proceed.
If you will, Mr. Irvin.
Yes, Board Chair. So I would like to I'm in favor of having an email message being sent. Someone reached out to me prior to this meeting with a complaint and wanting to know how they could register that complaint. And I think email would be a efficient way of getting that complaint into our hands.
Thank you, Mr. Irvin.
Can we do
Mr.
both?
Valdez?
Can we do both phone and email? I know there's a lot of individuals out in the community that don't have the resources to, type an email or have internet services. So if we have the opportunity to do all 3, email, phone, and in person, covers all aspects of the community. So I'm in favor for doing all 3.
Why not open every avenue possible for the
Correct.
public to make a statement?
Such request need to be in the form of a motion.
Please.
I move that we allow communications to the Civilian Review Board by telephone, or voicemail, by email, and by public appearance.
Second.
Robert Irvin has placed a motion on the floor in reference to having public comment be accessible to the public in reference to email, voicemail, and by written or in person. Mr. Valdez has seconded that motion. Any further discussion? We'll continue with the vote. All those in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed, please show by raise of hand. That motion passes. We will continue that method.
And I will revise the public notice moving forward about those options.
Thank you. We have been blessed with the attendance of our chief of police, so if you will, continue, Mr.
Chair,
Tamayo.
if I may, just a response to the public comment. Mr. Nahava's concern about the noise ordinance, could we request from the police department some kind of report on any kind of activity or implementation of that noise ordinance since it's passing?
Requesting for a presentation in
It
reference to
doesn't
the
have to be a
notice.
presentation, it just could be a report on the activity.
I can address
implementation,
that
response.
tonight briefly if you'd like.
So we do have in our presence our chief of police. She's here tonight to share with us under items, community and Tampa Police Department matters. With no further delay, if you will, Chief, please continue.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Mary O'Connor, Police Chief, City of Tampa. Very excited and honored to be here in front of you tonight. I'd like to start by addressing the gentleman's concern about the new noise ordinance as it pertains to, from what I understood, traffic stops. So the way that it currently works is that there is a 50-foot rule that is prohibited by city ordinance, that if an officer hears a vehicle traveling at a certain decibel rate within 50 feet of the officer, that they could be cited with a city ordinance. That law is changing effective October 1 to a Florida traffic law where it's going to be reduced down to 25 feet, okay? So instead of a city ordinance violation, it will be able to be punishable by a uniform traffic citation or a ticket. And it also reduces the number down to 25 feet. So we have not enforced this new law as of yet because it's not effective until October 1. As with any new law, obviously our goal at the police department is prevention, and then intervention, and then lastly, enforcement. So with this new traffic law, just like any other new city ordinance or any law, we would start with an education component to anyone that is stopped within the 25 feet of the loud noise emitting from the vehicle. We would warn and we would educate on the new law prior to any enforcement action. If you'd like to, we could report back at some point after October 1 on any statistics of any numbers of warnings or any numbers of citations that we are writing. But again, we do currently write city ordinance violations, but it's for the 50-foot rules. So, yes, sir.
Question, so you said Florida is going to cover the entire state of Florida?
Yes, that's going to be a traffic law, yes.
10-4.
And do we know what that decimal rate?
I don't. We can report that back to you.
Dr. Collins?
Oh, it's just so that they can hear it?
Yes, ma'am. It's
I'm
just
sorry.
audible by 25 feet.
Audible from
25 feet.
right. But again, with anything, we want to obviously start with education. And then enforcement is our last resort after someone has been sufficiently warned.
Any other comments or statements in reference to the noise ordinance? If you will, Dr. Collins.
Two. One is, this is a Florida state law that was passed at some point during the past legislative session that goes into effect October 1st. It is not a law that was passed by our local law enforcement or any other entity.
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the public clearly hears this is a Florida state. And
Correct.
we are
This is
following
this is a
Florida state.
statewide Florida statute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like everything else that we
Like
received after the
yes,
session.
like the other traffic
Yes.
laws that we enforce.
Okay, and then the other, when you said prevention, intervention, and enforcement, just briefly, can you tell us, with prevention, trying to do the education, but once a person is stopped the first time, will they be, I know we've done things like that, and part of education or intervention may have been given warnings. Will we be required not to give warnings, but to give tickets? Or can you just briefly tell us?
No, we're never requiring a citation or, you know, I mean, obviously the goal of our department is to start with a prevention effort, which would be that education piece. You know, giving everyone the benefit of the doubt that they don't necessarily know about the 25-foot rule, which I think is fair. And when you educate the public and you say, okay, you have to lower your volume so that we can't hear it, within the 25 feet, now we document that warning, so now the next time an officer may or may not stop that individual, they would have that information at their fingertips, and then they could act appropriately. I would say, I can't give you a number, but after sufficient warning and you're still not in compliance, I think that's when, the enforcement, i.e. the traffic citation, would potentially come in.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. If you will, please continue.
Sure, if there's no other questions, I believe you have two things on the agenda tonight from myself. I'm going to start with the presentation that's on the screen. It's a brief presentation about our violent crime involving firearms. As all of you know, when violent crime involving firearms is prevalent in the city, there really is no other priority other than the police to try to prevent, do intervention techniques, and lastly, enforcement of violent crime involving firearms. So we have a pretty good picture right now of what we're doing in the department. Just a quick overview. The slides cover the overall violent crime statistics, our non-fatal shootings, our population versus our crime rate, our gun seizures, and our stolen gun numbers. And again, I'm going to explain all of this to you. So violent crime offenses with a firearm are broken down into four categories that you see here, which is an aggravated assault with a firearm, which is like pointing a gun at somebody, a homicide involving a firearm, a robbery with a firearm, or a sexual battery that involved a firearm. And if you see, the first column is 2022 year to date. So this is January through July, and then 2021 for the same period. As you can see, our aggravated assaults involving a firearm are down 12%, which is a great number. 359 victims the same period in 2021 versus 316 now. And then the other categories are slightly up, but as you can see by the numbers, they're not crazy volume of numbers. Like the sexual battery with a firearm is up 50% because there was one more case this year for the same period last year. So overall, I'm happy to report violent crime involving a firearm in the city of Tampa year to date is down 7% total, which involves all of these categories. These are our non-fatal shootings, 2020 through 2022 year to date. Obviously, a non-fatal shooting is where someone gets shot but doesn't pass away as a result of the shooting. And as you can see, 2022, we are down compared to the same period in 2021. We are still higher than 2020, but we are trying to maintain that crime reduction. Our overall gun crime by district, as you guys know, the geographical boundaries of District 1 are pretty much South Tampa, MacDill Air Force Base, West Tampa. District 2 is New Tampa, everything down Bush Boulevard down to Hillsborough Avenue, and District 3, as you know, is Hillsborough Avenue all the way down to downtown Ybor. And this is the gun crime by district. Year to date, obviously, District 3 is our heaviest district as far as gun crime is concerned, and District 1 is our lowest. But this just gives you a picture of where we are by district. These are just some demographics of gun, the total demographics in the city of Tampa versus gun victim race demographics and gun suspect race demographics. These demographics may come into play later with the presentation that Captain Messmer has on our new traffic stop dashboard. Gun seizures, this is a good slide also, because these are guns that are taken as a result of either a traffic stop or a pedestrian stop or some investigation that leads to an illegal firearm being taken off the street, which is a good thing. So as you can see, District 1 is down a little bit this year, but District 2 and 3 are significantly up. In District 3 particularly, which is a pretty high, historically high crime area with gun crime for us, as you saw on the previous slide. The officers on the street, through their hard work and diligence, have managed to take 442 firearms off the street. This just the first half of 2022, as compared to, almost 100, over 100 less than the same period last year. But with the positives of the gun seizures also comes the negatives, and I wanted you as the Citizen Review Board to be aware of the, marked high incidence of stolen guns out of unlocked auto burglaries. So this continues to plague our city. You know, we obviously are strong proponents of responsible gun ownership, and leaving your loaded firearm in an unlocked vehicle where, you know, a thief can come and steal it continues to be problematic. So as you can see, our stolen guns out of auto burglaries, 50% of our rate of auto burglaries that have guns stolen are unlocked, and only 9% are locked. So, you know, it's something that we as a community have to do better. Obviously, these stolen guns are often ending up in, you know, the hands of the bad guys that are wanting to use them in a bad way. So this is what you would call like a heat map of our shootings, 2022 versus 2021. We did not include New Tampa or South Tampa, way down by the Air Force Base, because the number of shootings is fairly insignificant in those two areas. But as you can see, just from 2022 to 2021, most of our shooting incidents do occur on the eastern side of the city of Tampa. And that's pretty much it. If anybody had any questions on any of those statistics, I'm happy to answer them.
Let's begin with Corporal Reyes.
Hi, Chief, how you
Hi,
doing?
I'm good.
On the last slide, for the legend, what do the colors denote?
So the colors represent shooting incidents. We separated the colors out so that you could see. So, because if everything was red, like it wouldn't, so the colors represent just the incidents themselves, the dots on the map.
So it's the type of criminal activity that involved a firearm?
Yes, every one of those
Okay, I
dots
got
on
it.
the map represents a shooting incident. So if you see the top of the legend in 2022, that there's 235 dots on the map, and in
Right.
2021, there's 255.
Yeah, I was trying to look for like any kind of cluster of colors.
Well, they are kind of
trends.
clustered. I mean, they are pretty much mostly on the east side of the city, which has just historically been that, you know, that way. Anyone else?
Dr. Collins?
Two questions.
Yes,
One
ma'am.
is, under the stolen gun, which you indicated was really plaguing the city, I think the unlocked, locked, and then the others. What is encompassing the others?
That's where a gun is stolen out of something other than a vehicle. So that would be a residential burglary or a theft from, you know, a business of some sort. So these are the total stolen guns in the city. We just wanted to show you that a large number of them are from unlocked vehicles.
Okay. And the second question is it possible to get a copy of this presentation so that we would have a copy of it?
I don't see any problem with that. Sure, we can get that to you.
If
Thank
will,
you so much.
If you can leave
Yes,
this
ma'am.
particular slide up, obviously the 50% of the stolen guns that end up in bad situations, is the guns coming from a particular area that those patrons aren't locking their guns up? Have we identified a certain area where there's a lot of burglary, where it consists of a firearm being stolen?
Well, unfortunately, the unlocked vehicle problem is a citywide problem. I would have thought that it would have been, you know, down in, you know, maybe South Tampa, or, you know, I don't know, people feel comfortable leaving their vehicles unlocked, but surprisingly, it is a citywide problem. It's very evenly spread throughout the city.
You will, Mr. Agandela?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
The number of guns stolen from, or just guns stolen, is that taken from the recovered guns, or are those from people reporting when their car's broken into that their gun has been stolen?
Yeah, no, those are stolen guns. Those are guns owned by you, and then now you leave your gun in your car, someone breaks into it, and they, you know, illegally remove your firearm that belongs to you. These are
When that
stolen.
person- Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. The recovered guns are ones that are either taken as evidence through investigations, but also found property, right? So we had a gun buyback earlier this year. You guys may have heard, we took 1,000 guns off the street. It was very successful. Those are all entered as recovered firearms.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So the recovered numbers would be different.
We got Mr. Irvin?
Welcome, Chief.
Thank you.
My question is, Do we track the stolen guns to criminal activity?
Yes, if we're able to, we do. So if we're able to identify where a gun was stolen from, obviously it's going to be, that person's going to be a suspect in that offense, whether it was an auto burglary or a residential burglary or whatever. But we also have technology available where we use ShotSpotter, where we can look at evidence recovered from shooting incidents and try to tie that evidence to other shooting incidents around the city. So we can see whether or not a gun that we may have recovered was used in previous firearm-related offenses, which obviously helps with our closure rate. If we find someone with a crime gun and it's related to multiple offenses, we can sometimes make a case on that person for multiple charges.
Do you have the figures that would, or the data available from guns that were stolen out of unlocked vehicles and then, in fact, used in criminal activity?
I don't have that. We should probably start tracking that. I think that that's reasonable to ask now that we've identified such a problem. I think at the end of the day, it's safe to say that, if someone's taking a gun out of an unlocked car, they probably don't have any good intention with it. But I do think it's reasonable for us to maybe at the end of the year see how many of those guns we've recovered and in what type of a situation. We can provide that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You with Mr. Valdez?
Thank you for the presentation, Chief.
You're welcome.
2 questions. The gun buyback program, when you guys rolled it out, was there any shift in data, trend analysis after that event that we saw the numbers go down?
There was not. A lot of times gun buybacks are not directly related to crime that's actively occurring. What the goal is to prevent those guns being involved in future crimes. So we didn't see any decline after the gun buyback, but I think at the end of the day, an unwanted gun by anybody is a good gun to not have on the street. If someone has a family member pass away and they have no reason for the gun anymore, that was the purpose of the gun buyback. We got anonymous donations to the tune of $100,000, so we were able to pay the public for the guns, and we got over 1,000 off the street. And we destroy those firearms, by the way. We don't keep them for any other reason. So I can't say there's a direct correlation, but we could, from a preventative standpoint, those are guns that can't be stolen and used illegally because they're not in the home anymore.
10-4, just curious if there was a correlation.
Sure.
And then the second question, is there any prevention programming that will be geared towards our youth? Most of the numbers or the incidents that makes up these numbers are incidents regarding our youth. So is there any type of programming, prevention programming that's going to happen inside the schools or the parks and recs so that we can educate our youth?
Yeah, so since I took over here, I've been very committed to engaging our youth in very positive ways to avoid, to that prevention piece so that they don't believe that using a firearm is a good option. I think that our young people are, obviously immature and their brains aren't fully developed, so they don't understand the full consequences of their actions. And then obviously with all of the school violence incidents across the country, we need to be keenly aware of ways that we can positively engage our youth, whether that's through engagements in our parks. We had a lot of parks and rec programs this summer where the police and parks were deeply, heavily invested in the community. Parks had a stay and play program where the parks stayed open until like 11 o'clock at night, and all the parks that were open late at night, TPD was there, engaging in the youth in positive ways. We had a TPD Youth Academy this summer where we took in 26 kids from around the city in order to show them the positive aspects of the police and how we do things. That was a great week for the kids. So next summer, I know we're planning on having more youth academies. We did have a great meeting with the Hillsborough County School Board, the superintendent. We are, obviously very engaged through our school resource officer program. We're meeting with them. We're just putting out the whole, if you see something, say something, and trying to get the youth in our community and our schools to have trust and relationship building with our police department. So, I could stand up here all night and tell you about programs. We've reinstituted reinvigorated our TPD chaplain program. So we have our chaplains and their clergy members, preaching on Sunday about, youth and just trust in the community and safety and the need for everyone to just, feel positive about it. I mean, I think that society is in a tough place overall. So we as a community, the more we can do to get our youth feeling positive and not feeling like, like a violent act is something that's a good idea is a step in the right direction.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or statements for our chief? Very well. Thank you for coming out. Oh, if you will, Dr. Collins.
Yes, ma'am. This is not on the presentation, but I just wanted to ask a question, if
Sure.
I might. The information that we all have been hearing on the news about resurfacing of the bicycle, are there any plans with TPD to make sure that we are not reinstituting that, and if it's going to be taken care out of another office, are they looking at old factors that are already there? And if you're not prepared to say anything about that, I understand it.
I'm a wide open book. The answer is there's no reinstitution of any program, period. I have purposely not come out and made any statements because I believe that the Biking While Black issue, even though it was very important to the community, it was a very long time ago. And we have since changed the way we do business at TPD as far as the citations are concerned. The officers are fully aware of the fact that the goal here is education before any enforcement measures, i.e. citations, as we talked about earlier with the noise ordinance, so that if we are stopping anyone on any bicycles, it's with the goal of safety and education in mind and not citations. So I really didn't want to revisit anything based on our new state attorney rescinding a memo because there was no policy in place to say, go out and write these tickets as of the last several years here at TPD, nor really was there ever to begin with. It was a very well-intended, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a well-intended initiative that had very, unintended consequences. And I just really feel like we need to move forward instead of backwards. So I know there's been a lot of questions about that, but I have obviously purposely avoided it because I just don't want to reignite something that's not there, if that makes sense.
Chief?
Yes.
Thank you. I know it wasn't on, but I had this down to ask as a question tonight and pulled out the O because the intent of the program never was bad. And I did not want to see us go back to try to
We're not going
impose
backwards
something.
at all, ma'am. We're going
Thank
forward.
you so very much.
The police department's moving forward 110%. So we're not, yep. Yes, sir.
You will, Mr. Valdez.
I also just wanted to add, and also wanted to do a motion earlier or later today regarding the Biking While Black, citing that we did not support or recommend for the reinstatement of the program. Shame on the state attorney for making what she did, and any other elected official for putting these things out there and setting our community backwards when it comes to programs like this of this nature. So I do want to put on the floor a motion that this board, to put it on the record, does not support the Biking While Black program.
Can I just clarify the state
Yes, you
attorney's
will.
position? I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of the state attorney, but her and I have had conversations, and the previous state attorney had a standing rule that there were certain misdemeanor crimes that if they occurred as a result of a bike stop, that he was not going to prosecute them.
Sure.
Okay? The current state attorney rescinded that, but she never said that she is going to institute any overt act to try to arrest people, write citations, or prosecute certain crimes. What the memo said from the state attorney was that she is going to review every case on a case-by-case basis, which I believe is exactly what we need our state attorney's office to do, is to review every case on a case-by-case basis. Mr. Warren and Ms. Lopez were basically saying the same thing, but I think it might have just been a little misinterpreted. So I just want you to know, from the police department standpoint, we're not changing the way we do things. We're welcoming the fact that every case is going to be reviewed. That's all. That's all, because we don't want to change the way. I just want to make it very clear that the standard of a police officer making a stop on a bike or a car or whatever, and the standard of whether or not any charges stem as a result from that get prosecuted, it's two very different standards, and we're two very different departments that operate independently. That's all. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So definitely just want to keep the motion on the floor, that this board does not support the program Biking While Black, or any program that targets the Black, Brown, and Latino community.
Before we move forward on any particular motion and further discussion, is there any other questions for our chief in reference to the issues, the presentation that we had tonight?
I have one more quick presentation for you,
Okay.
but not
If you-
about
if you
violent
will,
crime.
Let's continue
And
with your
okay.
presentation.
So I just
Mr.
wanted
Valdez,
to-
We'll come back to
Okay.
your motion.
Thank you. I just wanted to let you all know about my community impact team. This has been a program that previous administrations implemented, and I think it's a really good idea to have a segment of the community above and beyond yourselves that I can just have kind of like eyes and ears out on the street to kind of tell me what, deployments need to be adjusted, like what the issues are in the community. I think I'd like to invite a cross-section of the city to apply to be on the community impact team, and then I can just have regular conversations with a cross-segment of our entire community that represents the community, so that I can hear from them, because I don't believe that the Tampa Police Department can operate efficiently without having a voice, everyone having a voice at the table. And I think that this just gives me another opportunity to have like an advisory board, if you will, of people that can call me and say, hey, we're having, speeding complaints in this area, or we're having loud noise complaints in this area. And not only like report it, but also kind of get advice on the direction that the police department should go. Because I believe that, we serve at the pleasure of the community, and whatever the community needs is what we should adjust to. So I'm just going to be forming a community impact team. We're going to put an online application on the website probably in the next few months, just to see who's invited. I'm not going to limit the number of people. I'm just going to see what kind of interest there is, and we can report back to you in a couple months on how that progress is going. But that's just another program that I'm implementing. That's it.
Any questions in reference to the community impact team?
Just the only thing, is that similar to what the mayor's, so like and the reason I'm asking, like the mayor's advisor, the sheriff advisor, because I think all of those are good for outreach as many times as, in as many ways as we can get to the
Very
community.
similar programs, yes, ma'am. Very similar, just specific to what the police department does.
Very good.
Yes, thank you.
You with Ms. Guy?
Yes, Chief O'Connell, I want to thank you for coming and talking to us this evening. We have not had the pleasure of the chiefs this engaged with us in the past, frankly, and I think this is great, and we feel like, I feel like the information you gave us tonight was excellent, and, we are here because we represent our communities, and it's great to have you here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm happy to come anytime you guys want me to come and report on anything. I'm honored to be here tonight.
You're with Mr. Irvin.
Yes, Chief, again, your desired impact for this community impact team, if in a perfect world, to meet your outcomes, what would be your desire for the type of community involvement or the type of applicants that would sign up for the program?
Well, we made the selection criteria fairly simple. Team members must live in the city of Tampa for at least the last 5 years, be active in their community, and be available for individual conversations as needed to provide us with factual matters impacting the community where they live. The selection will focus on people with diverse backgrounds who can provide information and perspective based upon their life experiences. So we welcome everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Again, thank you, Chief, for being present tonight. Thank you for the data that you shared with us. Thank you for all you do in our community and keeping it safe.
Thank you, everyone.
You're
Have a
always
great night.
welcome, and we look forward to engaging with you on more occasions to come.
Excellent. Thank you.
We will continue with the agenda. Moving back to item 7, and I haven't forgot about your motion that you stated on the floor. We could return to that under CRB staff reports and business. That's something that we can engage in discussion with. But let's continue with the agenda under item 7, items to be reviewed. Tonight we're reviewing case 20F-142. If you will, Captain Messmer.
All right, thank you, sir. Captain Patrick Messmer, Tampa Police Professional Standards. Before I start this, I just wanted to clarify one thing that the chief said. She made a comment about the new noise statute about October 1st. So the statute was passed by the Florida legislature. It actually went into effect on July 1st. However, part of that bill requires the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles to provide guidance and training about the enforcement of that statute, which they have not done. So we have actually, our legal team has sent out a message to all the officers about that statute cannot be enforced until that guidance is provided, which we were hoping to have by October 1st. So there was not a hard and fast October 1st date for that statute, but we're not going to enforce the new changed noise statute until the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles provides that clarification that the law requires them to provide. So that's, I just wanted to clarify that, because technically the statute is in effect right now. It's just not enforceable right now. So
Thank you for that correction, or that
so
additional
I will
information.
I will move on to the case. So this case involved a standard of conduct violation by one of our reserve officers. Our reserve officer was working in an off-duty job at Amalie Arena. This occurred back on the 29th of September 2020. This was the night that the Lightning ended up winning the Stanley Cup. So he was working the watch party at an Amalie Arena. After the Lightning won the game, there was a large group of individuals who forced their way through the barricades, knocked over all the barriers, and rushed onto the secure area of the plaza. That area was cordoned off, number one, for safety and distancing purposes because of the pandemic, and also to basically designate an area for those who had a ticketed watch party and those who were not. So large group of people broke through those barriers. People started climbing up on poles and whatnot. One individual climbed up on a pole. He subsequently knocked the pole over and broke the pole. There were a group of officers who were trying to take that individual into custody. He was resisting. Officer O'Connor approached to try to assist taking that individual into custody. There was a large crowd that had gathered, was encircling the officers who were trying to handcuff that person who was on the ground. One of the individuals, there was actually quite a few individuals in the crowd surrounding the arrest. They were videotaping the arrest with their cell phones, which of course this was on body cameras. There's no issue with that. One individual was ignoring instructions to stay back. He came within 1 foot to 18 inches of the arresting officers. The officer slapped his hand out of the way, knocked his cell phone to the ground. The citizen picked the cell phone back up and ran back into the crowd. This case was initiated when our supervisors conducted a review of the body-worn camera footage of the arrest, and they observed the officer slap the cell phone out of the citizen's hand. This citizen is unidentified. He never came forward, never made any complaints. So based on the totality of the evidence and the interviews, the acting major at the time sustained a violation of the standard of conduct policy for knocking the cell phone out of the citizen's hand. The officer said that he wasn't sure what the object was. He said it could have been a weapon, but again, the captain who conducted the review felt, based on the evidence, that he should have been able to tell that it was a cell phone and was not a threat, so that's why the standard of conduct violation was sustained. He was issued a letter of counseling for that, and I don't know if you received a copy of that or not. He signed it under protest, and since he's a reserve officer, he's not entitled to the grievance process, so he was not able to pursue any kind of grievance with that.
Thank you, Captain Messmer. If you will, Mr. Tamayo.
Captain, this officer, I just want to just make sure there's no relation whatsoever to the chief?
No, there's not.
Okay. This officer had been with the Tampa Police Department for 28 and a half years, I believe?
Yes, he retired. He was a full-time officer and retired, and then stayed on the department as a reserve officer.
That evening, we're talking about several hundred people in Thunder Alley. Very likely a large number of them intoxicated, quite aggressive. Do we have confirmation of that there was a lot of?
Correct. There were several hundred people there, and not only that, but there was a large group of what was described in the report as a very rambunctious crowd. Some of them were throwing beer bottles and so forth at other patrons, and that's the group that these individuals were involved in, who ended up tearing down the light post.
Right, and this individual with the cell phone was part of that group that was beginning to surround the officers who were conducting the arrest.
Correct.
The person who had already damaged property and was dangerous, along with the rest of that large crowd. Officer O'Connor, did he have any kind of past record of that kind of aggression toward a citizen,
No.
civilian, anything?
No.
Could the reprimand have been done orally instead of written reprimand?
He could have been issued an oral admonishment, yes. Which would have been, that's the first step in the disciplinary process. The letter of counseling would be the next higher step.
Okay, so here we have a situation where the officers are being surrounded by a large group of aggressive people. This person came literally within 2 feet of Officer O'Connor. Officer O'Connor requests that he back off. He did very briefly, and then came back right at him within a foot or two.
Correct.
And I can understand, or we should understand, that when you're dealing with a large, rambunctious, aggressive crowd like that, that any kind of object, kind of dark object, can be mistaken for a possible weapon.
It's potential, yes.
So just wanted to just get that out there
Thank you, Mr. Tamayo.
into the discussion.
If you're Mr. Ingadella?
Yep, just a quick question. Can you run us through, I mean, just briefly, the difference between a reserve officer and then the regular officer?
Sure. So in this case, we have a reserve officer. So we have several different categories of officers. We have a fully certified full-time police officer who that's their primary job. They have a full law enforcement certification. They can operate on their own. They work 40 hours a week as a City of Tampa employee. You have what's called a Reserve 1 officer, which is what Officer O'Connor is. So he's been through a full police academy. In his case, and in most of our Reserve 1 officers' cases, they're retired TPD officers, and they just choose to stay on as a reserve to continue serving the community and for the opportunities to make extra money working events like this. So in his case, he can operate the same as a full-time officer. And then we have what's called a Reserve 2 officer. A Reserve 2 is what the Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission would consider an auxiliary officer. That is a part-time officer. So they go through an abbreviated police academy. They go through an abbreviated training period, and they have to work under the direct supervision of either a Reserve 1 officer or a full-time officer. So those are people who typically have another job, and then they do this basically like what a traditional military reservist would be. They have a full-time job, and then they do that, as on the weekends or when we have special events, things like that. The difference between a military reservist and a Reserve 2 would be that military reservist can do everything, if they're called up to active duty, that a regular member of the military can. That Reserve 2 officer always has to be under the supervision of a full-time or Reserve 1 officer. So all Reserve officers, though, are volunteers. They can work jobs like this and they can make extra money, but they are not compensated by the city of Tampa for when they work Gasparilla or if they're out on the street patrolling. They do that on a volunteer basis, and they also have no protection under the city's civil service rules as well. So they're entitled to union representation. If they're a member of the union and they're in internal affairs, they're entitled to the coverage of the Bill of Rights and what they're accorded to by statute, but they can't appeal anything through the civil service process when it comes to discipline.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If you will, Corporal Reyes.
Good evening, Captain. A couple quick questions. So what does DT instructor, what does that mean?
DT instructor is a defensive tactics instructor, so they would teach things like what's traditionally referred to hand-to-hand techniques, de-escalation, taser. I don't know if Officer O'Connor particularly was a taser instructor, but basically any unarmed defense techniques, that's what they would teach.
Okay, and then, as was already stated, he received a written letter of reprimand, counseling. Based on your policies and procedures, were there, in these kind of instances, is there any retraining or any kind of refresher classes that you would have put the police, the member through again to refresh their recollection on these types of situations?
Yeah, in this particular case, there wasn't any kind of training component to it, but anytime we issue discipline, we can require training to go along with the discipline. In this case, he had one perception that he maintained in his interview that he thought it could have been a weapon. The captain who reviewed the case, thought that was just not correct and that it should have been apparent as a cell phone. So I don't know specifically in that case what specific training would have caused him to have a different opinion about what the object was. But we always can impose training in accordance with any kind of discipline, which we tend to do every once in a while. We have an officer who will have a negligent discharge when they're taking their firearm out of their holster or something, and in addition to receiving discipline, they all receive firearms training in addition to that.
And then just one final comment, and to Mr. Tamayo's point, in those kind of situations where you have a hostile crowd, and I can very well understand the tension and the apprehension for our police, because not only do you have an immediate person that could pose a potential threat to you, but you don't know who's standing behind them and what, if any, firearm or anything that they have. So to me, as I was reading this case, I was trying to get a picture, trying to put myself in the policeman's position of, okay, he's at a heightened state right now and he doesn't know who's out there. But then when I read the statement of Policeman O'Connor, he stated in here that there were two movements that he did. When he first saw Anthony Quintero, the defendant, the guy that climbed the pole.
Correct.
Excuse me, the person that was taking the picture coming, he saw it on the left side, and it says in the statement he did an over-sweeping motion, but then he said, at which time that I saw it was a phone in his hand. And then at that point, that's when the person backed up, and then the person started coming back to him again. So in my mind, the police officer O'Connor already knows now it's a phone. He still went ahead and did the hand wave, and then, as he said, unfortunately, he hit the phone. So up to that point, if I didn't read that piece, understanding the environmentals with the crowd and what the police are doing, trying to protect the 4 policemen on the ground, trying to take care of the defendant on the ground, I could understand his actions until I read that statement where he actually admitted it was a phone, but he still went ahead. So
Correct.
I just wanted to make that comment.
Is there a standard distance for a citizen that wants to participate in using their phone to capture whatever incident or footage? stating for the safety of the officer, please step back, allowing the officer to do his duties. Is there a standard distance, or is that something that's determined by the officer himself?
Well, I would say that would be dependent on the specific situation. If an officer is telling somebody to stand back, there's a reason for it. In this case, a foot within arm's length, that is going to be too close, especially when they're struggling on the ground with somebody who's under arrest. Because you're right, we could see somebody with a phone, but what's to say they're not going to put the phone away and then jump on the officer's back? Just because they have a phone out doesn't immediately just give them the right to jump into the officer's face and potentially impede with the arrest. So the phone just doesn't give absolute absolution to being able to do whatever you want and come as close as you want. So I would say it would be more of a case-by-case basis, but like I said, in this case, there was actually a sizable crowd that had encircled them that was probably 4 feet or so away, and there were multiple people in that crowd who were recording with their phones, and this one individual just decided to come right up to him within really arm's reach.
Yeah.
And I think that's the issue, is that it's within arm's reach. They're being told to get back. They're already with a hostile crowd with somebody who's resisting on the ground. They don't need to divert their attention away from that person on the ground. And quite honestly, if they can and they have to redirect their attention to somebody else who's not following their commands, that person could be subject to arrest at that point.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Valdez?
Question, if the object was a firearm, is the sweeping motion protocol to knock down the weapon out of his hand and just leave it there, or what would have been the protocol for that?
Well, potentially, it would be, if you're in a situation like that where you have a firearm, the thing to do would be to get that firearm pointed somewhere other than at you. So in a situation where you have 100 people in close proximity, you're probably not going to try to take a shot at that person. So, the way we are trained, if you have a firearm, at close distance, do anything you can to get the firearm away, potentially grab that firearm and try to take it out of their hand. If it's a knife, then you definitely would use a sweeping motion. You don't want to grab a knife. But yeah, that would be protocol. If somebody is putting something very close to you, you just need to get that out of your face as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Ms. Guy?
Thank you. Turn my mic on. What I think this case brings forward to me is the fact that the body-worn cameras work. We had a supervisor looking at the camera video and making a determination that this officer may or may have done something inappropriate. And, we hear a lot about body-worn cameras in this venue. And I think this is one instance, and it does tell me that is a good thing, and they are reviewing these camera videos. But the other side of that is, I also think it sends a message to the officers that these videos are being looked at. And even, they can't watch every one of them, but, they're obviously looking at some of them. So I think this is a great case. Thank you for bringing it forward, because I do think it indicates that the body-worn cameras are a good thing and they are being looked at.
Sure. Just to address that too, so this would be considered a case, we have different levels in our response to resistance continuum. So anything that's considered level E or higher, and this would be considered a level E because he used a countermeasure, those have to be reviewed by the supervisor. So the random reviews, that is done on a completely random basis. They'll pick one here and there, but any kind of an incident where force like this is used, it will be reviewed by a supervisor all the time.
Thank you. Dr. Collins?
Thank you, that was excellent. I kind of thought the same thing. Member Guy, that's what I saw as well. However, in reading this, and I thought I had copied that page, and I didn't. What I also picked up in this, and I want to commend the officer, don't know who it is, and I can't remember, but I want to commend the officer because apparently someone had their knee on someone when they were down, and the officer specifically said, take your knee off their neck. and they took their knee off the neck. And I read that in here, and I thought even looking at this body-worn camera incident, which was small, it brought out more that we do have officers that are saying, hey, that's inappropriate. And I can recall when we looked at those 7 points, and it might have been what you were just mentioning, this is an E above, but we were looking at that some time ago when there was some trouble. And here's an officer that was, I call it in my own way, it could have been more trouble, but he was de-escalating because this is only a little camera situation. And I actually was involved with a situation like that yesterday, and I'm going to say it. William 844 was a good de-escalating officer on yesterday, and I think that's the commendable thing, that while you're getting a chance also to look at the cameras like this, it also get to, if you read it clearly and get inside and you see everything that's going on, we could even see great work that's also being done, and I think we need to acknowledge that's when it's being done as well. My only concern with this whole case was I noticed that the volunteer officer, what we call him, a reserve officer, I looked at it, and when he signed his letter, he said on here, I want to make sure I get it right so I don't do it wrong. But he did sign it, the letter of counsel in violation of manual regulation of 1005 standard of conduct, and when he signed it, he put up on it, protest. And I did see that. So, I mean, he was obviously saying he didn't think it was that much to it, so he was protesting it, but it's a policy. He violated the policy, and you brought it forward.
Correct.
Any other questions or statement for Captain Messmer? Thank you, Captain Messmer.
Thank you, Chair.
The chair is open to a motion on whether we as a board concur with the findings and disposition of this case, or not concur, or unable to reach a determination. Okay.
That's second.
Board Member Robert Irvin has made a motion that we concur with the findings and disposition of this case. Dr. Collins has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we will continue with the vote. All those in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed, please show by raise of hand. That motion passes. Thank you, Captain Messmer.
You know that one opposed?
Yes, and Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say that I concur with the finding, but not with the disposition.
Let the record show Mr. Tamayo concur with the findings, but not with the disposition. The letter.
I would just state that in this particular case, the first level of discipline is a verbal admonition, and I believe that should have been what would have occurred here in this case. But I do agree with the findings.
Thank you, Mr. Tamayo. We'll continue with the agenda under CRB staff reports and business.
Again, Captain Messmer with Professional Standards. So the first thing on this part of the agenda would be to go over the vehicle traffic stop policy and dashboard. So I don't know if you recall, several months ago, there was some public comment made at the meeting about transparency in our data from traffic stops. So we've always been able to provide data regarding demographical information on citations, but up until the 1st of July, the department did not require any sort of documentation when a traffic stop leads to a warning. So that policy has been changed. So as of July 1st, we are now required to document all traffic stops. So traffic stops being defined as a vehicle, which would include a bicycle, being stopped for any sort of traffic infraction or potential traffic infraction. So in the past, we would always be able to provide the information on our citations, but just not on our warnings. So now, when an officer stops somebody and warns them and doesn't give them a citation, they don't have to do that in writing. They don't have to print out a written warning and provide it to them, but they do have to go back in our system, and they do have to document that warning with all the demographical information that the state would require as if it was a regular ticket. And in order to make sure that we're doing that, Our data integrity unit and our quality assurance unit are doing audits of all of our traffic stops, and they are ensuring that there is a corresponding citation or warning, or in very specific cases, a street check associated with those. So that's how the policy has changed since July 1st. And now we have, so I'm on our website right now, and there is a section on here under the transparency part where we have the traffic stop dashboard. And my understanding is we are the only agency in the area that we're one of the very few agencies in the area that publishes something like this. So this specific dashboard, and again, it's only going to be accurate till about July 1st when the new policy went into effect, when we started capturing the warnings. But this is going to give demographical data, and again, it's publicly accessible, so anybody can pull the data and look at it and do whatever analysis they will. You're going to have demographic data, the percentage of traffic stops to all calls for service. You have a chart of how many citations and warnings they're writing per day. It's a breakdown of which of our patrol districts these are occurring in, and then there also is a map down here that maps all of the citations and warnings. So you can see the yellow areas are the higher concentration. So major roadways like Kennedy Boulevard, you have Bay Shore, a lot of the East Tampa area, a lot of the North Tampa area, again, more major roadways, Bush Boulevard, Fowler, Nebraska. That's kind of why you see some of the concentrations that you do. So one of the things you'll see, I know that the chief showed the map of the violent crime a little while ago. You'll see a pretty big concentration of traffic stop activity in a lot of the areas where the violent crime's occurring, East Tampa, Ybor City, parts of North Tampa along that Nebraska corridor, the Sulphur Springs area, and so forth. We also have a lot of traffic stops on Kennedy Boulevard, down around Bay Shore, Gandy, that's where we get a lot of traffic complaints. So location of the traffic stops are coinciding a lot with both traffic crashes, traffic complaints, and the violent crime, with the focus on violent crime. So there's a lot of data here to be able to digest, but this is a good start to be more transparent about who we're stopping and where we're stopping them and who's getting citations and who's getting warnings. As you can see, the bar chart down here at the bottom, the blue is citations and the orange is warnings. So we have a significantly larger number of warnings than we do of citations. So I don't know if there's any specific questions on this, but it is out there public now for everyone to look at and for you to peruse at your leisure.
I think this is a wonderful tool, and again, it supports transparency, and again, the data, it speaks for itself. Anyone else want to make a statement or comment? Mr. Valdez?
I'm just impressed with the overall dashboard. I remember the conversation we had here when it, has related to this matter. So definitely appreciate you bringing this back and presenting this and making this available as detailed as it is. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
And that would include, you said vehicles will include bicycles, et cetera, right?
Correct.
How about
So
those little carts that they ride on?
yeah, so we can look. I'll click the plus here. So we do have bike stops included here. We can, I believe we can click on the bike stops and we can get specific, bike warning data. It will give you a percentage. It'll give you when they're occurring. It'll give you the map over here. No, this would be a bicycle. So it would be anything that would, so a motorbike would probably be considered a bicycle as long as it's not considered a motor vehicle. If it would be an electric bike or something would be considered that. I know that there was something about golf carts. I think a golf cart would just be considered a regular motor vehicle. Wouldn't be considered a bicycle. So,
About
yeah,
those electric scooters that we have, that you see them sitting everywhere.
yeah, they're considered, that would be considered a pedestrian on an electric scooter. They're not considered. So basically, we just have it specifically with traffic stops, which includes everything but a bike. And then we have the bike stops. Since bike stops there's always been some interest, in bike stops. So we are separating the bike stops just so we keep the bike stops separated if somebody wants to look at the bike stops.
Captain, could you go back, please, to the results of stop by vehicles?
The results
Yeah,
of-
and I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a breakdown by race or ethnicity?
This
No,
one right here?
it was on the top right, you had a results of stops of vehicle.
Yeah, they're right over here. So we have Asian, Black, Hispanic,
Okay, so
Indian, other
citations.
white. Citations and warnings. So we have citations in the top and then warnings right underneath it.
Okay, so,
So if there's nothing there, then that's a
Right.
0.
right.
And the interesting thing, we are, again, bound by the state here. So the state, for whatever reason, considers Hispanic as a race. It's not, it's an ethnicity. But because the state allows somebody to list Hispanic on a driver's license, and that is a state form with a traffic citation, we have to also adopt that for this purpose. So when you look at some of our other crime stats, you're not going to see Hispanic as a race because we consider that as an ethnicity. But that is an issue here, and it's not anything that we have any control over because it's a state of Florida form. It's not a city of Tampa form.
And just an observation, looking at these numbers in a vacuum, or that one can state that it is more likely than not that you will be issued a citation as opposed to a warning if you are white, as opposed to a black motorist or a Hispanic motorist. Just looking at these numbers in a vacuum.
Yeah, it would seem like the percentage of white motorists who receive citations is higher than the percentage of black motorists.
And would that also correlate with where those citations were issued?
So what I can do is, for example, I can look at District 3. District 3 is predominantly the East Tampa area. So we can look down, and that basically shows you everything south of Hillsborough Avenue. It also does include the downtown area. So when you look at the traffic stop by race, you can see that there is a larger number of African Americans who make up that specific demographic in District 3. So that would basically tell you that in that specific district, there's a much larger percentage of black people being stopped. If you move over to District 1, which does not have as large of a African American population, you can see that the numbers are very much more toward both whites and Hispanics, because the West Tampa area also has a significant Hispanic population. So, I mean, it doesn't really get into more specific details than that, but you can click on the specific area and it will tell you the demographics in that area who are being stopped.
Any other questions or statements in reference to the dashboard, the traffic stop dashboard? Again, very good tool. This is something that the public will have access to as well. And again, it definitely going to support transparency and also support other identifies as well. So a great tool. Can't wait to have the opportunity to look into some of that data myself. If you will, let's go ahead and continue in regarding the discipline matrix.
Yes, sir. So this was something that was requested several months ago. So I've just been able to get back and present this to the board. So it was asked to look at a discipline matrix. So for those who may not remember, I found some, there was a publication, a National Institute of Justice publication that kind of talked about just discipline in general, and it also looked at, and discipline matrices is one of the things that was defined. So really, they're designed to let employees know in advance what discipline they may receive, and for discipline to be fair and consistent. That's the main purpose of them, to make sure that officers receive similar discipline and consistent discipline every single time. I looked at some agencies that had them. I looked at some different discipline matrices around the country. We actually presented a discipline matrix. I didn't know it back in, I think it was 2015 or so, to the command staff to see if TPD wanted to adopt a discipline matrix. There's not a lot of consistency in them. Some of them, like for example, NYPD has a very, very detailed discipline matrix, but it only deals with very serious violations. So if you use excessive force that results in death, that's on there. If you use excessive force that results in serious injury, that's a different one. If you use excessive force that doesn't result in any injury, so it's very, very specific at NYPD. NYPD doesn't look at any kind of what would be considered minor violations. They look at the serious stuff, officers committing criminal activity, off-duty, officers using excessive force, things of that nature. Other agencies have discipline matrices that are not that specific, that are more broad, that will encompass specific violations. They will put different violations in a class system, a category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Some of them go as high as 7 or 8. Some of them stick to kind of levels 1 through 3. So most of them have what would be considered mitigating factors and aggravated factors built into it. So you might have something that could range from a letter of counseling to a suspension based on certain things that would mitigate the discipline or certain things that would make the situation worse and aggravate it. So usually with them, there's a range of discipline. One, for example, I don't know that I would consider it a discipline matrix because it's not referred to it as that, but when I looked at it, it's somewhat similar, would be Orlando. Orlando has 3 different categories of violations in their regulations, categories 1, 2, and 3. The interesting thing about them is that like a category 3 is anything from an oral admonishment to termination. A category 2 is an oral admonishment to like a 4-month suspension, and a category 1 is an oral admonishment to a 30-day suspension. So there's a lot of leeway within that, and what I noticed with some of these discipline matrices is there's a lot of leeway in general with them, and that is that's one of the challenges with them. Especially with us, you guys have read some of our regulations. This case this month is an example of it. This is a standard of conduct violation. We issued a letter of counseling. One member believed that was even too much, but we've had other people who've had standard of conduct violations, they've been terminated. It just depends on what the standard of conduct is that they've done. So for us to have a discipline matrix that would say, well, you could get anything from an oral admonishment to termination, what's the point? That's kind of the issue there. Something as specific as NYPD's, with those serious violations, even that, we have excessive response to resistance, excessive force. For us, that's considered a serious violation. It could result in termination, no matter what, if any, injury occurs to another person. So in that case, we wouldn't even want something as specific as NYPD. So there are I think there's a lot of challenges with it. Number one, two, it doesn't, just because we have a matrix in place, that doesn't mean the discipline's going to be justified. We could set the discipline at letter of counseling for everything, and there's going to be situations that don't justify a letter of counseling. We could set the penalty higher, and that doesn't mean that just because it's on paper in a matrix that's acceptable discipline. I made a presentation several months ago about progressive discipline, about just cause. These are legal factors, and regardless of what a discipline matrix says, we still have to be able to prove just cause for discipline. We still have to be able to prove that we've gone via progressive discipline unless there are those mitigating or aggravating factors. So, like I said, we did explore this years ago before I got to Internal Affairs. I brought it up again with the command staff, and we already consider the severity of a violation, length of service, prior history, the officer's intent, whenever we impose discipline. So we have very broad MOR, manuals of regulation, like I just mentioned. So to have something with this huge variation of what could happen, it's more of an issue of making sure that the punishment fits the offense. And that's done really on each individual case. Sometimes it's very, very easy. We have for example, we have an officer who's involved in an at-fault crash on duty. The standard violation for that, if somebody's looking at their computer and they're sending a message and they rear-end somebody who stopped at a red light and they do some property damage, nobody's injured, they're going to get a letter of counseling. And that's a violation of our vehicle operations regulation. They committed a violation. They were driving carelessly, so they get a letter of counseling. If an officer is going 100 miles an hour with no lights on through a red light and he kills somebody, he's still going to be in violation of our vehicle operations policy, but he's probably going to get a lot more than a letter of counseling for that. So to have a discipline matrix that would say letter of counseling determination, it really, in my opinion and in our staff's decision, this would be a solution in search of a problem, because we don't have arbitrators coming to us and saying that we are unequally imposing discipline on people unevenly. And that is the reason for a discipline matrix, that the literature says is to make sure that it is consistent across the board and everybody gets the same thing based on whatever factors need to be there. So again, we don't see that as a problem. We haven't been told that's a problem. So it's not something that the chief and the command staff want to explore us doing at this time.
Well, thank you for definitely coming back at board members' requests with that information to give us some clarity on how we do things here in Tampa. Might not be necessarily how things are done abroad, but again, it customizes what is needed for our city. I know Mr. Valdez requested for this information. Do you have any statements, questions,
No,
concerns?
I appreciate your presentation and your research and all the time and energy that you put into it. I recall this case when we discussed it because we all agreed that the discipline that individual received was not as high as we wished to see, and that's how this whole came to light. So we have made a recommendation to see something more in place as a discipline matrix. So, if the chief is not wanting to, move forward with this discipline matrix, there's, not much that we can do here. But this was a recommendation that we had done months ago.
Sure, and I would just say to that, the matrix is, like I said, the point of it is to make sure that it's consistent. The chief, even if the chief did decide that we're going to implement a discipline matrix, what that discipline is going to be is a completely separate issue. So that discipline could be low on the matrix. That doesn't mean that the board would necessarily agree with the disciplinary recommendation whether or not the matrix exists. So that's one of the, I understand the board's decision in that one case that they believe the discipline should have been higher than it was, but I don't know that the matrix would have necessarily addressed that, because that was an attentiveness to duty case where we've had everything from an oral admonishment to a termination, depending on how bad the attentiveness to duty has been. So that probably would have been one of those situations where it would have run the gamut of the matrix, and they would have had to have picked something in the middle to do.
Again, thank you for that clarity. Any other questions or statements in reference to the presentation? Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
Captain Messmer. We'll continue with the agenda, items to be continued. Don't believe there's any items to be continued. I do have one notation based off last month's case of number 18R-001. We have proposed that a letter or acknowledgement or some type of notification get out to the participant that prematurely brought that case to the board? Were we able to type up anything as far as notification to that particular person that came out to public comment that wasn't able to be present when we reviewed that particular case?
Kamari Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. Mr. Chair, I'm still looking to figure out who that person was. So
Okay.
as soon as I'm able to identify who that was, I'll report back to the board and provide a copy of that letter. Well, just inform the board that the letter was sent informing of the resolution of the matter.
Okay, thank you very kindly. If you will, Mr. Irvin?
Yes, Mr. Board Chair, I just wanted to remind you that I thought we were gonna take up, Member Valdez's, motion.
Yes.
Under
CRB staff reports and business. Thank you, Mr. Irvin. If you will, Dr. Collins?
Yes, prior to doing that, I want to go ahead and take up his, and then I'll ask a question afterwards.
So there is a motion on the floor in reference to Member Carlos Valdez, in reference to the bicycle stop policy and program. If you will, it's been some time that lapsed. If you can restate that motion
Sure.
and bring everybody abreast, and then we can continue with the discussion if necessary.
Sure, so the motion is that this board does not support, does not recommend a program such as Biking While Black or any other program that the city will roll out as it relates to targeting our Black, Brown, and Latino community.
Is that the name of the policy, Biking While Black?
That's the name of the program.
That's the name of the program?
Do-
Biking
do we-
While Black?
It's no longer in
So
existence.
So
Yep.
let's state the correct name of the program and not get
Sure.
into editorial.
Became known.
Known as. So the program
Okay.
is not in place anymore, but I just want to make sure that that the city does not intend, or the police department intends to go back to its programs as such, given that the state attorney pushed back the current policies from the former state attorney.
So for clarity purposes,
Let's
especially if
discuss
there's a
it
motion on the
before.
floor and you speak in reference to a particular program, then that program needs to be titled as such and not what it has became or properly known as.
I think the problem is it doesn't have a second, so if we could just discuss it, I think it might.
Okay.
Because there's no second on the motion, so.
Okay, Mr. Irvin? There's
No,
no
I said
second.
it wasn't a second, so if we just discussing it, there was no second.
If you will, Mr.
Yeah,
Irvin?
I was premature, I was waiting for the discussion person to bring
We
out
got
some
into
of the
discussion
points
before
that
we
you-
second,
Sorry.
yeah.
Okay. There is a motion on the floor. Is there a board member that wishes to second that motion? But before seconding that motion, I wanted clarity on the motion in reference to the exact name of the program that he was speaking
May
in
I-
reference to.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
If you will, Dr. Collins.
here's the program.
Okay.
And it was an examination of racial disparity in bicycle stops and citation made by Tampa Police Department. That's the exact program. We actually had it before us. Of course, I'd been involved with it prior to this. It was the Cox program with VCPI that came into Tampa, and it wasn't Biking While Black. What happened is the disparities in the case showed that more blacks were arrested disproportionately, and immediately when the program was started, that's not why it was started. The program had very good intents under the past chief of police and under the past mayor. It was a good program. I know I was involved with it from the inception, but when the results came back, it showed that, and as a result of that, the program was immediately squashed. That's why I asked a question of the chief on the position of TPD. So this is the name of the program. We actually had a presentation of it here. And I didn't want to stop the motion because what I would like to see is not send a negative message to the current interim state attorney. I was going to ask, was it conceivably possible for her to come and do a presentation? So whatever her intents were with what may have been misinterpreted, if she could come before us and make a presentation to us, therefore the community will also benefit from hearing her presentation. We've been hearing what she said, or someone else said, but we have not heard it from her.
You will, Mr. Irvin? Thank you, Dr. Collins.
Yes. I think it may be more responsible of us to request after the program has been reinstituted for a period of time for them to come back and report to us on the results, to ensure that it hasn't gone back to what it was previously, through unintended consequences.
But, may I?
If you will, Dr. Collins.
As the chief kind of mentioned, and what my concern is, I don't want to see this program reinstated in any form, way, or fashion, but I would like to hear the interim state attorney come before us and just explain to us. It seems like it was a misstatement. We don't know, but if we can ask her, she could come and talk to her, because I don't think that I want to ever see this program reinstated, because I saw the intricate pieces of it, and I don't know if that's what you meant to say. I just would like to hear a presentation from the interim state attorney on the examination of racial disparity in bicycle stops and citation made by the Tampa Police Department in whatever year that was.
And that's the motion, is not to have that program back into place, that we recommend not to have it back in the city of Tampa.
If I heard the chief
If you will,
correctly,
Mr. Tamayo.
if I heard the chief correctly, that's a dead letter. The police department is not going to enforce. It's a dead letter. So I frankly don't understand why we're even discussing this any further.
I just wanna have it on the
The police department is
record.
not going to follow through on that program.
Mr. Irvin?
Great point. What I heard the chief say is that they would like each case reviewed on its merits. So while there may not be a policy specifically, they will conduct traffic stops to include bicycles for safety violations. And from those stops, there may be additional legal actions taken based on the merits of the case, if you will, which may involve background and other things. That's what I heard.
So we do have a motion on the floor.
No, we don't, because we don't have a second.
We don't have a second.
Okay, and I'm saying that because I kind of sort of want to second it. What I'd like us to do, if you would consider not making a motion yet, is let's ask for the interim state attorney to come and do a presentation before the board. I don't want to ask someone to come and do a presentation and we've already taken a position, even though everybody have their own position. I just would like to hear a presentation so we'll understand exactly what her intents are. And then after that presentation, it may be appropriate for us to take other action like a motion, et cetera. And I don't know if that's something, but I would rather have it that way for clarity. And we would have it, just like we got it from the chief, and the chief was explicitly clear. I would like to hear it from the interim state attorney.
So the question is, Mr. Valdez, even though we engaged in discussion at this moment, hearing from your board members, would you like to remove your motion?
I would like to remove the motion so that we can move forward with what Dr. Collins had mentioned, to have the state attorney come and present. I just want to make sure that our recommendations are being captured properly, because if there's nothing on paper saying that the board recommended such, then it never happened. So even though chief of police, presented to us and she said and she gave her word, if we never had that, feedback on paper as a recommendation, then our voice was never counted. So that's the purpose of doing the motion as it relates to this matter.
Ms. Kamara Pettis-Mackle, is it possible that we could send an invite for a presentation to be presented to the board in reference to the statement at the program at hand, or if such a from the district attorney? Interim state attorney.
Kamari Pettis-Mackle from the city attorney's office. I'm sure it's possible to send out an invitation. I don't know what the response would be, but.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what I say, let's see.
Okay, so if you will, we will send out such an invite.
Well, Is there a motion and has there been a vote on the motion?
The motion was made, and
No.
Can
I
you
haven't,
restate
there
the
hasn't
motion?
been a,
Yes,
the motion was made to have the
can you please
state attorney, Suzanne Lopez, present to us on her stance as it relates to biking policies, and rescinding the prior policy as related to State Andrew Warren that did not continue the program, that we had here in the city of Tampa.
Second motion.
Board Member Carlos Valdez has made a motion in reference to the invite to get a presentation to the board in reference to such program. And Dr. Collins has seconded the motion. Any further discussion?
Mr. Velez, can you clarify that part of the motion that includes State Attorney Warren?
Yes, so there
I would
was,
say take state attorney.
Yeah, I don't understand why that's, we just want to hear
Sure.
from the interim state
Yep.
attorney. There's no reason to add to that,
correct, that's fine.
some kind of conflict with the, okay. So,
So if you will,
The motion would
Mr.
be-
Valdez, you can restate the motion.
The motion is to have the current state attorney, Suzanne Lopez, present to us, her policy as it relates to biking, and what that would look like moving forward.
Motion has been amended. Do we have a second?
It's still second.
Still second.
He just-
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll continue with the vote. Those all in favor of hearing, or for the invite to the interim state attorney to have a presentation to the board in reference to such program, please show by raising hand. Any opposed? The motion passes for the invite. If you will, just keep us abreast once the invite is delivered, and what will be the response, if any. We'll continue with the agenda under announcements for news business. The next meeting will be held on the fourth Tuesday of the month of September 27, 2022 at Forest Hill Community Center, 724 West 109th Avenue in Tampa, Florida, 33612 at 6 p.m. And that's in district, which district does that represent?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's, Councilman Vieira's district.
So let's give him notification, and if his schedule allows, if he can be present, that'd be great.
He's already been notified,
He's been notified.
And it's possible for us to get that nice announcement that you did previously so we could send them out to.
Board members, for any reason you're unable to attend the next meeting, please notify our city clerk, Ms. Tanya Wilcox, in 48 hours in advance so we can ensure our voting forum. Before I adjourn this meeting, I would like to give the board members any opportunity for any final statements or comments at this time. Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.